Would like to welcome everybody here to the November 16, 2017 meeting of the City of Davenport Zoning Board of Adjustment. Your participation in city government is always appreciated and welcome. If you have a pager or a cell phone, please turn it off now. Even in silent mode, it may interfere with the room's electronics. My name is Kathleen Hart. I'm chairman of the committee and the members present today. To my far left is Christine Woodard. To my immediate left is Jim Reistroffer, our vice chair. To my far right is Judith Lee, and to my immediate right is Carrie Strayhall. Staff present today, we have Matt Flynn. We have our new city attorney, Mallory Hoyt, and we have Eric Longlet, I believe it is, helping out from engineering. Zoning Board of Adjustment is a 5-member judicatory board established by state law. We are appointed by the mayor and confirmed by city council to serve without compensation for a 5-year term. We normally meet twice each month to hear appeals involving hardships from strict application of current zoning laws. We may also grant variances and rule on a variety of discretionary permits. Introductions done. Any corrections needed to the minutes from, let me see, what date was that meeting? October 12th meeting. Nope. October 26th meeting. No corrections. A motion to approve the minutes.
Move to approve.
And a second.
I second.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Opposed, same sign. That's approved. We have no old business. We have only one item on today's agenda. This is request SUP 17-02 by the National Guard to allow construction of an approximately 85,000 square foot readiness center on 37 acres at the northwest corner of Wisconsin Avenue and Kimberly Road. The property is zoned A1 Agriculture District and R1 Low Density Residential District. Section 17.48.010A of the Davenport Municipal Code authorizes the Zoning Board of Adjustment to review and approve any public building of erected and used by any department of a municipal, county, or federal government. And Matt, if you would like to please give the presentation for the city.
Thank you. Again, I'm Matt Flynn, Community Planning and Economic Development Department. What you have before you is a special use permit for the National Guard. This project has gotten a little bit of publicity over the few years. They have, in essence, worked an agreement with the Davenport schools to exchange property, the property on North Brady Street, north of the stadium, for this property. The location, if you go out Wisconsin Avenue, it is the property right before you get to the ball complex there at the intersection of Wisconsin Avenue. It doesn't include the exact corner, but it's for the most part it's a 37-acre tract located in that quadrant. I've overlaid the comprehensive plan. I think that is important to note. Even though this property is outside the urban service boundary of the city, and that will come into play as I know there were questions regarding sanitary sewer. It was identified in the recent plan update in 2015 to designate this property commercial industrial, and that was in anticipation that perhaps a special or unique development may be coming forward. So you can see, while for the most part this area remains in what we call the agricultural reserve, meaning property that we don't expect to develop for quite some time, some limited residential, the plan does recognize the potential of the site for a facility such as before you today. I don't expect you to be able to decipher the plans. They were included in your report. We can maybe go back to those if necessary. I will want to point out one change that occurred fairly recently, and that was to, in essence, and I know the rep from the Guard will be able to address it, but the driveway onto Wisconsin Avenue is in all likelihood, well, it's certainly not going to happen originally, but even long range, it's doubtful that that will be developed. Instead, there will be an additional driveway proposed to, Kimberly Road that both our engineering department and the Iowa Department of Transportation have been reviewing. Again, just a rendering of the facility. It's very similar to the facility located near the Eastern Iowa Airport in Cedar Rapids. If you've been by there, it's kind of northeast of the terminal area. Floor plan, again, we can go back to that, and elevations. Yeah, I think the guard is mentioned the community when we had our neighborhood meeting that they don't intend to just build a fortress or a bunker. This attractive building with a lot of, I'll say, modern architectural elements in terms of variation in the facades and materials. So I think it's a good looking building. So again, why was it before you? Section of the code that deals with special use permits requires that public facilities of other state, local, federal government installations need to go to the city for a special use permit. And there's the 5 criteria that were included in order to move the project forward. And just remind you that the difference between a hardship variance and a special use permit is that there is no hardship to determine. This is within the realms of the ordinance to allow it. So your job is to ensure that the project can move forward in a, I'll say, harmonious manner with the neighborhood, with little impact on surrounding properties. I did add a few questions. I guess maybe at this point, it would be, and this maybe a bit of commentary. It would be easy to just say, well, this is a National Guard, a vital governmental function that we should be, accepting in open arms. But I will say that working with Mr. Brothers and his team, they've been very open and accommodating, not only having a neighborhood meeting that they were not required to have. That meeting was a few months ago, but we had about 30 people in the audience. One of the questions that was raised was, do we have a transcript of the questions that were brought up? And I to be honest, I did not take detailed notes, but there were concerns. We're not going to have any helicopters here, and they wanted to know more about the logistics of those convoy movements, which I know that Mr. Brothers can talk about a little bit further. We had about 30 people there. I think they did more listening, but it was a good opportunity to I'll say answer the questions in advance. As you can see, we've notified property owners within 200 feet, and we don't have anybody in the audience here to express any concerns. So getting back to the additional questions, I know that there were questions about the septic system versus tying into the sanitary. Perhaps Eric Longlet could add some more information if you wanted on that. More information about those convoys that will occur just a few times per year, whether or not there's parking, and then the status is any and all EPA permitting that is going to be necessary for this project. So again, I highlighted some of the key points within the 5 criteria for special use permits, making sure that we're safeguarding the health, safety, welfare of the community, the old adequate light and supply of light and air. That goes back to I think the dawn of zoning, and just zoning was in response to the overcrowding that was occurring in the East Coast, particularly New York, post-industrial revolution, where you've seen the pictures of the kids hanging out the fire escapes and whatnot. It was a real big deal. I don't know if it's it's maybe so relevant here in this situation. Again, we'll probably talk a little bit more about what those convoys do in terms of traffic and safety, its impact on property values, if any, and making sure that's in accord with the city's long-range plans for the area. So at this point, staff does support approval of the special use permit. I've added 3 conditions. One, that we actually go through what we call a formal site plan review process, where we really dig deep and maybe answer some of the questions that might be a little bit ambiguous at this point. Again, we've talked extensively with our public works people and the DOT over a course of many months to ensure that traffic can be managed there, but we want to make sure that any approvals is tied to those approvals. And I did add, the number 3, it's not included in your packet, maybe to address, well, we've got other permits out there hanging, and it kind of doesn't need to be said, but it never hurts to document that, in fact, that this development will need to get any applicable state, federal, and local permits before they move forward. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Commissioners have any questions for Matt? Yes, Jim.
Matt, do we, you said you have a representative from the company that's going to do the construction?
We have somebody from I believe the design build firm, as well as the I'll say the project manager from the National Guard here that can answer questions.
So we have a representative from the National Guard.
That's correct.
Judith.
I have a couple of questions. You said that there was a corner along Wisconsin and Kimberly that was not included.
Mm-hmm.
Who owns that, and what's there? What's the status of it?
I believe the property is let's see, is really, let's see, like, quit shaking. It's really just there in the far corner. Do you have an idea how large that property is?
That little corner, I really don't, man. I'd be guessing.
Yeah, it's certainly less than an acre in size. I believe there's an old corn crib on the property, and I believe it is owned by the owner across the street. It's almost a remnant parcel.
Okay, another question? Can I ask another question, Kathy?
Oh, of course, Jim.
Oh, okay. Could you tell me again when the OS or the CI was rezoned, and were there any opposition? Was there any opposition when that was rezoned?
No, it was not rezoned. That is the comprehensive plan,
the new
future land use map, which provides for zoning. I did not include the zoning map, but I can tell you that there is I would have to say, arbitrary 200-foot depth of R1 that's along Wisconsin Avenue. The balance of the property is zoned agricultural.
Okay, so at that time there wasn't any concern with the residents that you can remember?
We had multiple neighborhood meetings leading up to the adoption of the plan, and again, we really cast a pretty wide net. I don't have the information specifically, but we included, people up in this neighborhood. I believe is that 60th Street. But we notified these people of this neighborhood meeting, and again, we had about 30 people turn out, but for the most part, they were pretty supportive of the project.
Okay, and then I have one more.
Yes,
Is that
of course.
okay? Could you go back to the,
Site plan?
yeah, you read my mind. Yes, thank you. Could you show me, if you're not going to have the driveway from Wisconsin, could you show us where the new driveway is expected to come in?
If you could pass it around, but that hot mic, that second driveway would be roughly, would extend back to the yard and back, right? And then it would extend outward.
So
Yeah.
if I'm reading, I'm sorry, if I'm reading this right, it would come in at the corner of Wisconsin and Kimberly and then follow?
No.
No.
It would be roughly here. The corner of Wisconsin and Kimberly is actually down here. And our last meeting with the DOT, their engineer was, wanted to make sure that their spacing requirements between intersections and driveways are being maintained, and that is the case. So.
Could you show, I'm sorry, I was looking down when you were showing. Could you show me again, please?
It pretty much, yeah. If you see it, it's on the floor. No, actually, it's probably it's it's still several hundred feet from where the map is cut off. So again, it's probably in that area. We'll go back.
This entrance is gonna come out here now. It'll just be straight up.
Well, Eric,
Yeah. Wisconsin and Kimberly will be way down here below the screen itself.
Yeah.
So this entrance will be about right here.
Yeah.
And it meets DOT separation requirements?
Yes.
Hard to read. And then it's intended to go all the way up and around the back, you said?
I think Mike Brothers can probably talk more about internal circulation.
hi, my name's Mike Brothers. I'm with the.
Do you wanna-
Wait.
Oh,
Hey, Mike.
Yes, sir.
excuse me.
Oh, sir.
We can,
I'm sorry.
we'll
to
have
be
you
recorded.
shortly.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
Could you give us your name and address and,
Yeah, sure. My name is Michael Brothers. I'm the project manager for this particular project with the Army National Guard. My office address is 7105 Northwest 70th Avenue, Johnston, Iowa, 50131. My apology for that earlier. So you'll see it's a little dark on this map that's up here. This is from the original proposal, and it's changed a little bit based on what is being passed around now. But the secondary entrance now is going to basically come down straight off of this this ring road, we call it, and then throw it out onto Kimberly here. And we're going to have widening of the shoulder basically between both of these entrances that are being proposed. So like Matt and Eric said, we have met with the city engineer and the DOT and started the process rolling as far as getting approval for that. And we just had a meeting this morning with Opus Group and asked them to remove all reference to any access to Wisconsin Avenue from the plans. So that's not even a consideration. It's not even on the table. We're not even laying the groundwork for that anymore.
thank you. Does anybody have any more questions specifically for Matt? And then we could, if not, we can go ahead and let the petitioner give their full presentation.
I just have a question.
Yes, Chris?
Just to clarify for myself, so the school district used to own that?
That's correct.
Just that one area, not the whole,
They own that property.
they own that property, okay. So we got a trade going on. All right, thank you.
Very fine, thank you. If the representative for the project now would like to come up and give us your name and address. You are the primary petition,
I am.
please, again.
I am.
You don't have to tell us who you are again, but
Okay.
just give us the overview of your request.
I really didn't come prepared to do that in any real great detail. But what I can say is that what's been put up here, we are presently working with Opus Group, which is a firm out of Minnetonka, Minnesota. They are our design builder, and we have already had a preliminary design meeting with them to make some minor modifications to the floor plan and the site plan. And the fruit of what came out of that for the site plan, we've already talked about basically, is that we've abandoned this access to Wisconsin Avenue and replaced it with a second access. And the second access is actually going to be one way only, basically entry. The main entry and exit from the facility is going to be from here. So, in a nutshell, just basic laydown of the facility. It's approximately 86,000 square foot building that is going to house 4 units of the Army National Guard, a battalion headquarters from the. It's an engineer battalion that's part of the 2nd Brigade that's going to actually relocate from Cedar Rapids over here, and then there's an engineer company and an infantry company, and then a forward support company. That totals approximately 370 soldiers that are assigned to the facility as their primary drilling location once it's completed. So, do you mind, Matt, if I go back to the questions that were up there? This really kind of helped frame. So like Matt mentioned, we did have the neighborhood meeting back in August up at the Fairmount Library, and a fair number of folks did show up for that. And we talked through the project at that time, took some of their concerns and questions. And I think we've addressed the primary one by removing the access to Wisconsin. There was quite a bit of discussion about the fact that that road was not really built to handle the heavy military vehicles. And also there was concern about the sight lines and visibility from the intersection of Wisconsin and Kimberly, and making it very difficult from a safety standpoint. So by eliminating any access at all to Wisconsin, I think we've addressed those major concerns. Some other questions that they had, Matt kind of hit on about the helicopters. We're not going to be landing helicopters at this facility. And I'll just go down these questions if you don't mind. The septic system is born out of the fact that, as Matt alluded to, there is not a sanitary sewer service to this site. So it pretty much forces our hand. Of course, all the other residents out there are already on those types of systems anyway. We tried very hard to work with the State Assembly and some other entities to try to get funding to extend sanitary sewer out to the site, and that was unsuccessful. But we are not discontinuing those efforts. We're going to continue to work to get the sanitary sewer extended out there in one form or another. But until that time, yeah, we do have to do a septic system. And Opus Group, with their engineers, are going to help us to make sure that we size the field properly and have it in the right location. Excuse me. And we have a government representative that did some initial look at this also and determined that, yes, that we should have no issues getting a septic system in place on site that will handle the expected population that's going to be using this facility. Excuse me. Is that me or?
It's never that hot, that mic, so.
So the as far as the second question is concerned, oops. Again, given 4 units that are there now, they are all affiliated with the 2nd Brigade. So there's a likelihood that they will be doing their convoy operations as part of their annual training simultaneously, which means there will be at maximum 4 convoys that will depart the facility and then return. And that's if all 4 of those units do their annual training at separate times. Now there might be smaller groups of vehicles that will be coming and leaving during weekend activities, but the primary convoy activity that would happen centers around the annual training period, which is usually in the summer. And like I say, it's an in and out kind of a thing. Happens once for each unit. So we're not really talking about a whole lot of convoy activity. The day-to-day population there is about 20 to 25 people. So we're not really adding a lot of additional traffic from a day-to-day standpoint. The weekends, those 4 units that I mentioned will more than likely drill simultaneously. I say they're authorized 371 people. That doesn't mean they have 371 people assigned. It's usually somewhat less than that. But we could be talking about 300 or so people showing up for the drill weekends. which are typically held on the first weekend of every month or thereabouts, depending on when holidays fall. So, and as far as the management of it, the folks that run the convoys and the units are all very practiced at it. They've been doing it since they were first enlisted, so they know how to get the vehicles organized. They know how to get them on and off. And typically we work with local law enforcement to provide traffic control around our sites to ensure that we have the maximum safety in place so that we're not disrupting the traffic that's going through the area about their normal business. Any other questions on that topic? Yes, ma'am.
Size of the vehicles, the frequency and management of the convoys, and you say it's primarily going to be in the summer. So I have several questions about that. One, that's where Kimberly is a two-lane road. So I would suspect that any convoy is going to block traffic. So I needed to know, how big a convoy is. Where are they going? Are they going over to 280?
Yes.
Or they're going over to 280?
They'll go over to 280. I would say almost without exception. I can't imagine a large group of vehicles leaving and going anywhere other than towards 280.
Okay.
It might happen on a rare occasion, but even at that, we're going to probably only be talking about 6 vehicles at a time.
Okay. And are they like the Humvee type vehicles, or are they
Yeah,
larger water tankers?
anything going into towards the city would more than likely be the Humvee type vehicles. The larger vehicles are all going to be pushed out to the main thoroughfares. We do have those types of vehicles. You mentioned the water tankers. We call them HEMTs, HEMT tankers that have either 2,500 gallon or 4,000 gallon capacity on them. They could either be water or fuel. We have those types of vehicles. We have vehicles that are called the medium tactical vehicle, which is kind of hard to give an analog that you might see, like a Ryder truck, for instance, a moving van. Those vehicles are about that size. They're a little heavier, but they are about that size. And then we also have the tractor-trailer combinations that haul dozers and other equipment that the unit uses.
Another question? The fuelers and water tankers are pretty heavy. Mm-hmm. Did you and the Opus group talk to IDOT about whether Kimberly Road can support that kind of traffic?
We have had that conversation with IDOT, yes, and their U.S. highway design standards are meant to handle this type of traffic.
Because it's a pretty old road.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, especially in that part of Kimberly.
But it's still designed to U.S. highway standards.
Okay.
So United States highway standards. So it's required to handle that type of a load.
Another question? Since most of the convoys will be in the summer, it's also when most of the ball games will be held, and you're going to be going in front of that ball field. Have you talked to anybody? I don't know who owns those ball fields. Is it the city or? But have you talked to anybody about the potential for any conflicts with people coming and going during ball games?
Not yet. No, we haven't gotten to that point yet. We would have that conversation at the time when the coordination needed to be made, which is prior to the convoy leaving. We're a little bit too far out in front to be having that conversation just yet, but it will happen.
Okay.
I can guarantee it.
Okay. And that's not a concern with the city?
Well, it's a school district property, and as we've had discussions, I think it was our understanding that these convoy movements would be pretty early in the morning, probably away from the times that the tournaments and whatnot would be going on. But that being said, the need for coordination is certainly worth noting and pursuing.
Yeah, like I say, ma'am, I can assure you that coordination will happen. If there is, because the folks that will be assigned here on a full-time basis will become very familiar with the activities that are going on at their neighbors there at the softball complex. So they'll be making sure to have those conversations. If they think there's going to be any safety issues or any conflicts.
Okay, I have questions on the sewer, so I'll stop and let you folks ask about.
Well, mine has to do
Chris.
with kind of what you were saying, and I understand that at the time that you will coordinate this with Park and Rec or the city. However, I guess I would like to see you communicate with the Park and Rec Department and the city ahead of time, just to see if there was anything that you need to know up front before any of this happens. Any concerns they may have. Just a suggestion. It's open communication, and you can see if, just ahead of time, not specifics, but letting them know what's going on and if they have any concerns. And that would make me feel a lot better.
We'll do that. We'll do that. I promise.
Thank you.
And coordinate, during, when there's going to be tournaments or that kind of thing.
I have confidence they'll do that, I think. But I just think there should be some communication now with the city and park department.
Yes, ma'am. We'll
Thank you.
do that.
Judith?
If it would be okay, could we go back to the question on the septic system?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I have two questions with that. One is, in your application, you talked about not only having the people who work there and then, of course, the people who are stationed there, during the weekends or whatever, but you also talked about it being able to be used during storm events or hurricanes or whatever.
That's correct.
As well as for community uses.
Yes, ma'am.
So were those considerations included when you talked about the sizing of the septic system?
Yes, ma'am, they were. I didn't bring with me today project requirements manual, which actually was given to Opus when they put their proposal together. It's about this thick, but it contains all of the analysis and all of the code requirements for every one of those types of usage. And so, yes, the system will be sized based on the maximum anticipated and allowable population by the safety code. The State Fire Marshal Office will be doing a review of the plans and specs, and so they will ensure that we have that taken into account.
So if it's used as a hurricane shelter, and you get many people from West Davenport coming over there, because I think the next closest one is probably the mall, and then maybe the airport.
Yes, ma'am.
So all that, you could be having a lot of people, and
Yes,
you've got a
ma'am.
pretty good size
Yes.
facility. So that's all been incorporated.
I'm not going to go that far because that would be, I think, not entirely accurate. Because if we were to get a really massive influx of people, which could exceed the design capacity, then we would have to have a plan in place to bring in temporary facilities. We're not going to be able to, anticipate all of that unforeseen. So that's why I mentioned the safety code and the state fire marshal. They have very strict guidelines for setting capacity in the facilities, and that's what we're going to design it toward.
Sure, that makes sense. Another question for you and for Matt. Since you're still seeking to get a sewer system, you're still seeking funding or whatever from the approval from the state, funding from the state?
Funding is the big thing,
right.
yes, ma'am.
Okay. How would that reflect, and this is for you and for Matt, how would that reflect on the potential for induced growth out there if a sewer system were to go in? Because that'll certainly encourage some of that farmland to go towards residential or some other kind of use once a sewer system is put in there. Is that something, how do we consider that now, since they're actively seeking that funding?
It's a very good question. Just real quickly, the city's comprehensive plan helps direct growth that is anticipated in the city for a 20-year period. As we speak, the good portions of Northwest Davenport are not served by sewer. Therefore, among other reasons, they are outside the urban service boundary. Now, those areas in the city that are outside the urban service boundary, there's nothing that says that growth shall not ever occur there, but there's actually policy statements saying that in the event that we are in a position to expand into those areas, that we should do it diligently and thoughtfully. And back to the specific question, if sewer was to be extended out that area, I think then the city would need to have a policy discussion. Is this I'll say an exclusive sewer for the National Guard facility, or is this something that we will invite property owners, i.e. developers, to tie into? Again, it's hard for me not to provide commentary, but given the pace of growth within Davenport, we have more than adequate land that is within our urban service boundary, shovel ready, if you will, to accommodate our short and medium term growth needs. But again, if council decides to, as you say and others say, open up land for development, that's a discussion that we can certainly have in the future.
So the next step then, let's say they do get funding, the next step would be coming before the zoning board or something like that?
Well, there would be no specific action by a board or commission, a zoning board of adjustment or plan and zoning commission, to simply extend a sewer. Now, if we were to be considering taking out land out of the urban service boundary and put it within our developable area, that would be something that would, after public meetings, go through the plan and zoning commission and ultimately the council as an amendment to the comprehensive plan.
Okay, so there would be additional public opportunities
Absolutely.
if that funding were to come through and the Army decided to go with that.
That's very true.
Okay, that's important.
Jim?
Yeah, Mike, is that all right if I call you?
Yes, sir.
Are you going to be talking about the building and the property aspects of what you're going to do?
I can.
Well, I'm looking at it as a former soldier
Oh,
and a person that was at that unit that you're going to replace. And I stopped in there many times just to see how my old place looked. And I guess that I'm concerned as far as the security aspect. Is there going to be a fence around that whole property?
yes, sir. In fact, you can see it on this rendering here. And again, this is going to change a little bit based on some of the discussion we've been having recently, but this is basically the laydown bit. So we've got the black vinyl fence, which is a little more decorative, a little easier on the eyes going along Kimberly, and then the 6-foot galvanized chain link going around the entire property. Now, it's not all going out to the property line. In some places, it will go out to the property line. But for the most part, it's going to be placed to allow us to have that security perimeter. We're required to follow all of the Army regulations and National Guard regulations for anti-terrorism force protection, and those are incorporated into this site plan.
That's what I'm concerned about. This is considered a military facility, and security is very important to me.
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to have cameras on the property?
No, sir. No, we are not planning for cameras on the property at this point in time. What we will do is rough in conduit for future installation. However, the project itself is not going to be paying for and installing cameras.
What I've got concern talking to soldiers that are there now, anybody can walk in their facility. And I don't think that's right. We've had a lot of problems with recruiting offices,
Yes, sir.
and this is a big facility. I mean, I got other questions that I'm going to present to you, but that's what I feel strongly about, the security aspect.
Mm-hmm.
And sure, the fence is fine, but who has access to it? Are you going to use cards to get into it?
Yes, sir. In fact, it may have been really incorrect to me. When you said cameras, I thought you were talking about like a closed circuit monitoring system. We install an iPhone system, which is iPhone is a proprietary, but it's basically an intercom system that has a camera on it that will be at the main gate entry point, and then also at the main entry to the facility. So, again, by our regulation that we have to follow, and by all of the funding that has been made available to us, we are going to put in the absolute maximum amount of security equipment that we're allowed to put in. So this fence then can be closed, and probably will be, at all times, and then persons that are wishing access will either A, have a card that will, be put up to a reader, which will allow them access, or they will have to engage the intercom system and get somebody inside the building to actively open the gate.
Okay. My second question, then I'll limit it to then I'll get back to the parking lot. How many parking spots do you have available for our soldiers?
Okay, so right now what you're seeing in this rendering, and I see if I can go back to the site plan. Yes. So on this site plan here, there's 247 stalls in the main parking area, and then an additional 50 for expansion. Based on our discussion yesterday with Opus Group, we're going to go ahead and pursue the construction of what they're calling additional parking on here now. So we'll end up with some of the other modifications that we're making to the site, right around 300 parking spaces for the 371 soldiers. We're authorized by regulation to build 90% of the parking spaces for the maximum expected drill attendance on a weekend. So you take 90% of 371, that's getting you to about, I should be able to do this in my head, but about 330 or something, 313, right around in there. So we're a little shy, but our plan is right now to use the ring road, which is really only going to be used heavily during convoy operations at annual training for any overflow parking. But again, I'll go back to something I said earlier too. Units are very rarely manned at 100%, and even if they are, with so many people at training and in transit and other places, the odds that we're ever going to need every single one of those parking spaces are pretty low.
But I was in an engineering outfit too, and you have a lot of heavy vehicles.
Correct.
And so they're going to be in the back.
They are. They're going to be back here. Yes, sir.
Okay. I will come back to you with more questions.
Great. Thanks, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Judith?
Another question, you've coordinated or will coordinate with our local police department and probably county sheriff in case there is an emergency or some kind of security breach?
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
The National Guard is part of all of the county emergency management planning
Yeah.
activities, so we're part of all that.
Okay. Another question, and it's just, I never thought of it until now. There's no sewer system, but I assume that there's water out to that area, yes?
There is.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, the only utility that we don't have out there is sanitary.
Jim, did you want some again? No? Carrie?
Just had an informational question. So when construction actually starts, are there local folks that are going to be involved in that?
Well, that's a very good question. I would assume so, yes. Opus Group is a firm that likes to work as much as they possibly can with local firms. This is a federally contracted project, so there's also requirements for various small business, hub zone business type goals that they have to meet. And a lot of those are going to come from the local area. Now, they have not bid out all of the subcontracted work as yet. That will happen as the project progresses. We're in the design phase right now. We anticipate to see dirt start moving in the March or April timeframe of next year. We'll have a groundbreaking ceremony about that same time, and then it'll take about 12 months to complete construction. But I anticipate that there will be quite a bit of local participation in that, yes.
Okay, great. We appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
Yes, Judith?
Going back to the, not going back, but going to the fourth question, I am making the assumption, and I may be wrong, that you are directly a part of DOD as the Army National Guard?
It's a rather complicated relationship, ma'am. With the National
Yeah.
Guard, it's a quasi-federal agency, or part of, and also part of the state as part of the Department of Public Defense. So we actually report up to a bureau called the National Guard Bureau, and National Guard Bureau then is part of the Department of the Army, which is part of the Department of Defense. So yes, in that regard, on our federal side, we eventually stovepipe out to the Department of Defense.
Yeah.
And then we've also got the state aspect of it.
So my question then, this was my question, and I know NEPA is not a permitting process. It's a planning process, and it's a federal requirement. And I went on the internet to try to find any kind of NEPA documentation for this readiness center. And I couldn't find anything on your website, and I couldn't find anything just in general. But I did find something where the Army National Guard was doing an environmental assessment for a movement of a similar readiness facility from a site into an armory, and that they were planning on doing an environmental assessment under NEPA. What is the Army National Guard here doing for this facility? Because I've got some environmental questions that have to do with the first criterion that we look at for a special use permit.
I'm not the environmental expert, but I'll do my best to answer the questions. I'm not entirely sure what triggers an environmental assessment. We also have a tool that we use in a lot of locations. It's called shortly, it's a rec and check. It's a checklist and then a recommendation that is prepared and signed off on by our environmental officer and then the adjutant general.
It's basically a categorical exclusion for the Army.
Categorical
I am very
exclusion.
familiar with
Thank you very
RECs.
Okay.
Yes. But why I asked is because this other facility, which was actually being decommissioned and everybody moving to an existing facility, apparently, did an environmental assessment for
Do you
that.
have any details on that? Because I'm not
I
aware
do.
of that.
I do, and I just found it on the internet, and I have a website that I can give you, but it was it had to do with Kearney in Nebraska.
Okay.
And I didn't copy everything because I was primarily concerned with a particular environmental question that's on your proposed action. But it wasn't, they did say it was an environmental assessment, not an REC.
Yeah,
So-
I'm
so
actually
that's-
kind of glad you said Nebraska because if there was something in Iowa that I wasn't aware of, I was really going to be chagrined. But since it's Nebraska, yeah, there's no way I would have heard of that.
Yeah.
And again, it depends on what actions are being taken to actually trigger the requirement. And it sounds like you're very knowledgeable, so I'm not going to try to teach you about it, especially since I don't know much about it. But our environmental officer and his estimation for this determined that the environmental assessment threshold had not been met. So that's why it was not performed here.
Okay, I guess the two questions I have regarding that, one is prime farmland, under that law that covers prime farmland. I don't know how that's been designated out there, but if it has been designated as unique or prime farmland, you have to go through the, it's not the NRDC anymore. It's a federal agency that does that analysis and calculation for you. And I don't know if it's been designated prime, but it's pretty good farmland out in that area.
My knowledge, that is not the case.
Okay, and then the other question has to do with stormwater pollution prevention plan.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I know, it's on your map. If you could go back to that, please. Okay, so you've got 3 planned ponds for that. Looking at the aerial photo where this has been the project's been superimposed, you have a major tributary going to the creek. There's,
Right there.
yeah, that goes along and goes down towards where all the residential areas are.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know if there's anything for the other 2 that are up towards Kimberly. I don't know where those would drain to, or if you're just intending to use evaporation from those ponds. Because you've got one in each corner down by Kimberly. See there?
Yes, ma'am.
And then you've got the one that's up by where it looks like there's an actual creek,
Right up here.
a tributary, yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
In that particular area that then looks like it flows towards the residential. So I'm just wondering if that one is going to be sufficiently sized to make sure, because we get floods, a lot of rain at times, to make sure that storm events are going to be able to handle if it goes into the creek without scouring. And two, if the other two actually drain anywhere, and if so, where do they drain? And, or is it just evaporation? And see, that's why I asked about NEPA, because those kind of questions would be considered. Whereas an REC is basically a checklist that just says nope, 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 nope.
Yes, ma'am. And I will tell you then, what we're seeing here is templated locations based on the proposal. Again, this design build process, this best value procurement, we require our proposers who are interested in getting this work to put together a document set, which is what Opus has done here, and which is what we're looking at. They have not gotten far enough along in the design process yet to be able to allow me to answer the questions that you just asked. What I can say is that we do know the requirements. They are in our project requirements manual. The city also has their requirements. Eric and his team will have an opportunity to review our site drainage plan and how that works. And I think the basic requirements is that we have to detain or retain water to a level that is at or even below what the original discharge rate is into the creek. And then we also have to plan for enough capacity for I believe it's a 100-year flood, or 100-year flood event, 100-year rain event. So, and I'm not quite sure what the city requirements are. Does that sound about right, Eric? So I can tell you we will meet all of the requirements for stormwater treatment and runoff that the city has as part of this project.
Okay. So
Whether the ponds end up where they're templated right now, I really don't know how that's gonna shake out, ma'am. I can tell you from our project that we did up in Cedar Rapids, which Matt mentioned earlier, the ponds all create a system that then drain internally before they discharge out of one location.
yeah, looking at the site, I don't think that and I could be wrong, but I'm not sure the drainage goes towards that direction. And of course, after you grade it, you would make sure it did.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And I'm sure most of you are maybe familiar with the site. It's very heavily relieved. There's a lot of topographic relief on the site. It's going to be quite a bit of dirt that's going to move. But yeah, it will get graded to the levels that it needs to make sure that we've got the drainage requirements met for the project site.
Okay. So, I have one more question about the NEPA. If indeed, RECs can stay internal to the agency. They don't have to go public.
That's correct.
Seeing that Nebraska did an environmental assessment, which is indeed potentially a public process according to the Army regs and national regs, and they were just doing it to move into what looks like an existing building. They were doing an environmental assessment, which is more of a public. Would the Army be committed if they were doing something more than an REC to actually do more public engagement?
Oh, yes, ma'am. In fact, we're doing, we just completed 2 environmental assessments up in the Des Moines area. There was one for land acquisition at Camp Dodge and one for the Des Moines Air Base. And it's a completely public process. We've got like 30-day public comment periods, like 2 or 3 times. Again, I'm not the expert, but there's 2 or 3 times throughout that process. So, yeah, if it was an environmental assessment worthy type action, that would certainly be happening.
And you would also include the city of Davenport?
Oh, of course.
Yes, okay.
Part of the public, yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Any other commissioner questions? All right. Is there anybody else here who had something additional to present that we haven't covered already? Jim? Yeah, Jim, I believe you have a question.
Yeah, I was just gonna, who's in charge of the building? Which is are you Mike, the contractor, that we can ask questions? Okay.
I'm with Opus Group.
Okay. I got this.
When you come up here, if you give us your name and address and then
My name is Brian Wickland. I'm with Opus Group. I'm their project manager. Our office that we operate out of is located in Des Moines. I don't have the
fine.
address with me, but it's Clive, Iowa. I'm actually a local resident of Davenport. I've lived in the Davenport area since 2004. Anyways, we are the design builder. We're actually using some local engineering firms for the civil. We're using McClure Engineering, which is a division of IMEG. We're also using Morrissey Engineering out of Omaha, and our architectural design and structural group is out of Minnetonka. We are working with a number of local subcontractors that are in the local Davenport area as well as Rock Island. I'm actually working on compiling and reaching out to small business groups and minority businesses to get them interested in the project and seek out their bidding. Did you have any questions for me?
I just have a question on the building. I'm speaking as an old soldier here. You know, when these soldiers are coming from Cedar Rapids and they come down here, you can have a few that are not happy about it because they're leaving their home base and they come down here. And are you going to have in your building places for them to stay overnight?
Brian, I'm afraid,
Yeah.
that's going to be on me.
That's still
Okay.
design.
You know, because, you know,
Yeah, I-
they don't want to go to a motel because it's too expensive and,
I feel I should let you know also that I'm a retired soldier. I'm a retired lieutenant colonel out of the Guard, so
Okay.
I'm very sensitive to a lot of the concerns and the issues that you have.
Yeah.
And I've been working in the facilities office for almost 30 years, 29
you
years.
understand what they're thinking.
Yeah, so I do, and I will tell you that we are not authorized to construct sleeping facilities, and the nature of the Guard has changed so drastically since you were in, and it's even changed drastically. I just retired 2 years ago. It's changed incredibly just in those 2 years as to how the demographics work out. Even the unit in Cedar Rapids is drawing people from all over the state when they come to drill. It's the same thing here, and yes, so there's a requirement when people are coming in to drill for places to stay. And typically, as long as we don't know about it, I mean, a lot of times it'll end up happening. But it doesn't happen as much anymore. There's been a lot more command emphasis on it. So the answer to your question is no, we are not building bunk facilities for soldiers that are traveling in for drill.
I don't want them sleeping in their trucks.
They won't be sleeping in their trucks, or they will either go back home at night, or they will sleep with friends, or they will get a motel.
Who pays for the motel? Not the Guard.
I believe that has changed here recently to where there is a stipend available for soldiers who are traveling over a certain distance to be able to get money for a hotel, but I don't know for a fact that that's the case. But I can tell you soldiers are not sleeping in their trucks overnight.
Okay. You ought to check. See what they're doing.
Oh, yes, sir.
Davenport. They are. Some of them are, and some sleeping on the gym floor on 37th and Brady Street. Because they don't have the money, you know, privates, they don't make a lot of money,
No, they don't.
and so where else they gonna sleep?
Yeah.
They don't wanna afford a motel, which is $89. So that what they're staying in the unit in the Guard.
Yeah, like I say, I believe that rule has changed, that they have access to funding to get a motel room. And also, like I said a little bit ago, I know that there is sleeping that goes on in these facilities. It's not supposed to happen.
But it is.
I know. Yes, sir.
They sleep wherever they can. Well, that's my concern. Thank you. As long as you're aware of it.
Oh, yes, sir.
Any other commissioner questions? And again, is there anybody else who was here with the project who had something to present that hasn't been covered? Sure. That would be Eric, right?
Yes.
Yes, our
Eric Longlet.
engineering.
Eric Longlet with Public Works, Engineering Manager, Public Works on 46th Street. I just wanted to let you know, listen to some of your questions. I think it was covered very thoroughly, and we have been working with Mike, the National Guard, with Matt. They've been very upfront with everything. Some of the concerns with stormwater, with the entrance, working with DOT, we've had some meetings with them, the neighborhood meetings, working with the neighborhood with Wisconsin. They've been very gracious with the neighborhood with that as far as the safety issues. DOT working with them and their concerns with Kimberly and also with the city. To add a little bit with the convoy, that's what the widening is on Kimberly, so that they can stage the vehicles ahead of time, so that as far as coming out onto the roadway, that's all ready to go, and then they can just take off, and the timing of that is going to be a lot quicker, I believe, in what they're doing to also accommodate the traffic flow. Stormwater and such will go through the rigorous review process that we'll have at the city, both with quality and the 100-year stormwater with a 5-year release rate. So again, they've been great to work with, and I foresee this being a great project.
Thank you, Eric. Judith, you have a question?
Eric, for you, going back to the access and exit, okay, including the new one, it shows that, if I understand it right, that it would be an entrance. This one, the one that's there, the way you've got the ramp designed now, it would be an entrance coming from Kimberly this way, or coming from the 280 side of Kimberly that way. Where would the Army vehicles be entering and exiting during convoys? And just to make sure that the ramps are right. And they won't be in the way of traffic until they actually get out into the highway.
Yeah, as Mike was stating, it's going to be widened between the entrances, both to the north and then the area to the southwest of the westerly entrance. So coming in, I believe they will stage before they enter into the site, you know, so that everybody is all put together. They only have to block traffic once. As far as leaving the site, they will be staged in front of the site itself between the entrances. And then with local PD or with Scott County, then get them at least all to take off at one point instead of all entering at different points with different.
So it's not turn lanes, it's actually widening both lanes, both
Yes.
directions
Yes.
from both entrances. So that entire area would be widened on both, for both lanes.
Just on the north side, between the entrances is widened.
Okay.
And then the area, as you see it west of that west entrance,
Could you use I don't know northeast, southwest on this, I'm sorry. Okay.
between this entrance, oop, what am I doing? There, I got it. I accidentally, too big a thumb. This entrance, that's gonna be the proposed entrance here that replaces the Wisconsin one going away. Between that east entrance and the west entrance, this widening will go all the way across there. And I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's where the staging of the vehicles will be prior to leaving?
That's part of it. That would act as either a pre-stage or a acceleration lane. We also plan on using the internal circulation paving that we have for staging of the convoys as well.
And then this one, as they come back from 280, I would assume they all come back, stack, and then turn in.
That would be one way of going about it, Eric. The other way would be to allow that widening for traffic to pass on the right as they make the left turn into the site.
True. I think accommodating traffic flow for Kimberly.
Okay. And as an engineer, I'd like to ask one more question about stormwater.
Yes.
That's a lot of non-permeable surface introduced into an area that's all permeable at this point, pretty much, except for the residential areas.
Correct.
So you're going to have a lot of runoff. So is the city comfortable that, that the stormwater plan as it exists right now, recognizing its design build, is going to be sufficient?
And in actuality, compared to some of the other sites that I've designed in my past and also that we've seen, this is 50% coverage. There's a lot of sites in town that they maximize.
Like the mall, or?
Yeah.
But then I've also seen what the mall did to Duck Creek.
Yeah, and yes, it will have to meet all stormwater standards and quality standards.
Okay, at federal and state.
Yeah, well, for city, and then what they require as far as their state. So, yeah, we have pretty stringent standards that have been recently passed for the city to upgrade what we have had in the past.
Because lawns put off about as much stormwater as tar does. There have been studies that have shown that. You'll get a lot of stormwater runoff off a regular lawn, particularly if it's if they remove the soil and put down sod.
And our standard is they have to put back down topsoil.
Okay.
You can't just put down clay and put grass on top of that anymore. We do require topsoil to be placed on top of that.
Okay, so if the city's comfortable that
Yes.
the stormwater is going to be taken care of,
Yes.
that's okay.
Yeah, our natural resources department will go through full review on it.
Okay, thank you.
Chris?
Has there, out of curiosity, has there been any discussion of permeability for the type of parking spaces or hard surface that there would be, or brick versus something else, or?
That would be up to them. You know, that would be nice, but it is not a requirement. That'd just be something for them to utilize as part of their design for quality or retention, but it's not required per se.
I'd like to see that happen. I'd like to see more permeability surfaces.
Any other commissioner questions?
Just got one
Yes,
question
Jim.
for Mike. Mike, there's been talk about convoys, and you know that you have to go to summer camp. At least I did, and I'm sure you did too.
Oh, yes, sir.
Once a year, you have the convoys that have excessive trucks. Am I correct? That would be in this unit?
Yes, as I mentioned in my opening discussion about it, with the 4 units, each unit would be doing it once a year.
Once a year. And we always left in the morning around 6 o'clock.
Typically, yes, sir.
So, Judith brought up about the ballpark. I don't think they're playing at 6 o'clock in the morning. So I think we've always left at 6 o'clock in the morning. Usually going to summer
Yeah.
camp. Okay.
That's true, yeah. They like to get as early a start as possible when leaving.
Okay.
Coming back, that's
a different story. Right.
But, Ms. Woodward, if I may also, to talk about your sod question. Right now, as far as landscaping is concerned, only what you see inside the fence line is going to get potential landscaping in terms of sod. Actually, we don't, we require either seed or sod. So the likelihood of sod going down is probably pretty low, since seeding is a cheaper option, and we get as good a coverage that way. So everything you see outside of this is more than likely going to go to native or some sort of a brome. We've used DOT mix, the DOT standard mix in a lot of locations as well. So we're not really going to be putting a lot of impermeable lawn type landscaping on the site. And then to your second question, as far as permeable surfaces, we studied that back in 2007, 2008 timeframe when we started our BRAC 2005 projects that we did in a few locations around the state, and determined that with the frequency, the type, and the weight of the vehicles that we have, we would be replacing that surface about every 3 to 5 years, which was not economically feasible. So that's why we did look at it. It was certainly an option that we had, but it's just not economically feasible for us, for our use.
Thank you. Any further
you.
questions? All right, seeing none, is there anybody in the audience who was here to speak in favor of this project or in opposition? Seeing none, we would ask for a motion.
I move that we grant the proposal with the staff's recommendations of SUP 17-02.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Is it,
I'm sorry.
We can now discuss now that the motion is on.
oh, okay, okay. So this is the time to bring up possible conditions for approval? I don't,
We would
did I
have to
miss it?
We would have to withdraw the,
Oh, never mind.
she was including the conditions that had been listed?
No, we already made our motion.
Correct.
Madam Chair, if I could ask who seconded that motion?
Carrie did. All right, we have a motion and a second. We would call a vote.
Reifstraffer,
Yes.
Woodard,
Yes.
Lee,
Yes.
Strayhall,
Yes.
Hart.
Yes, the request is granted. Thank you for your good works and all of your patience with all of our questions today. Well done.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.